We need to talk. And today we need to talk about one of the most famous pre-modern conservative politicians of all time. Now, if I was to say to you famous conservatives, you might think Winston Churchill, you might think David Cameron, you might think Margaret Thatcher. But if we go back before what we would probably consider the modern period, we need to talk about Benjamin Disraeli. He is one of the most important conservative prime ministers and thinkers because he represents perhaps the first big significant shift in conservative policies since the times of kind of Burke and Hobbes and things like that. And that becomes known as OneNation Conservativism. In this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about him. We're going to be talking a little bit about his ideas, and we're going to be talking about how you can see OneNation Conservatism in so many policies that have appeared in both my lifetime and yours. So let's get started. So here he is, Benjamin Disraeli. Looks like I need to crop my head ever so slightly. There we go. Right, here he is, Benjamin Disraeli. He is a very fine-dressed Victorian gentleman who was actually Queen Victoria's favourite prime minister. He once said that when talking to the Queen, you must remember first that she is a woman. So we can infer from this that he was a wonderful bit of a flirt and perhaps a bit of a ladies' man. And he was prime minister twice, which is definitely very rare in the modern era. In 1868, it didn't go very well, and he was removed from office almost immediately by the work of a man called William Gladstone. And Disraeli versus Gladstone is one of the most famous kind of rivalries in British politics, you know, kind of Blair, Brown, maybe Cameron, Johnson. But Disraeli-Gladstone is a big, big one. And there's a fabulous documentary on YouTube about that, which is well worth a look if you're interested in your kind of slightly earlier British political history. So he's prime minister very badly in 1868, but he comes back in 1874 to 1880 and really makes a difference to the country and to conservative politics as a whole. He is to date the only Jewish prime minister so far. If Ed Miliband had won the election in 2010, then he would have been the second, but so far he represents perhaps the extent of the ethnic diversity and religious diversity in British political history, and he is widely seen as evolving conservatism to one nation policies. And I want to talk just a little bit on this bubble, about what I mean by that. And you saw when you studied liberalism, and I hope you've watched the videos I made on that, is that liberalism, classic liberalism, begins, of course, just known as liberalism to start with. And then over time, some people start to see the kind of the flaws and the impacts in that. And some people then kind of say, well, we need to modify liberalism to be more of an enabling state rather than a night watchman state. And you kind of then get this kind of split within liberalism towards modern and classic. However, this is slightly different because conservatism, as discussed in previous videos, isn't so much an ideology in itself, arguably, as it is a pragmatic way of thinking and conserving and bringing stability and stability to a country to kind of keep things going. And so what is happening here is similar but different. It's similar in that we have someone recognizing the issues that are kind of coming up and thinking, well, how do we need to change our thinking? But conservatism almost as a whole kind of seems to evolve under his leadership. And one of the things that is particularly unique about conservatism, and if anyone disagrees with what I'm saying here, then do pick me up in the comments, is that more than all the other ideologies, it does evolve and it does change, which is ironic because conservatism is often seen as the don't change things ideology. But in order for it to not change things, it itself often has to change. So it resists the abstract liberal thinking and the abstract socialist thinking and the abstract, anarchist thinking, often by borrowing some of their ideas, merging them with their own and kind of saying, look, we can keep what we've got, we can keep our institutions, we can keep our monarchy, we can keep our social classes, but we're going to incorporate some of these newfangled ideas to kind of keep the country together, keep the country functioning. And therefore, more than perhaps any other kind of political ideology, you could look at a conservative from the 1800s or the 1700s, a Conservative from the early 1900s and a Conservative from now and see very different thinking because of the way that conservatism evolves and changes. Now, of course, you do get disagreements in conservatism, and we'll see that especially when we come to looking at the new right, and perhaps when we start to talk about things like globalization. I mean, you know how divided conservatives are over the issue of the European Union. So, of course, divisions happen. But what Disraeli does here that is definitely notable is that he demonstrates conservatism's ability to adapt and change as the situation demands it, which of course is seen in Burke's change to conserve approach. Why does it need to change? Why does it need to evolve? Well, Disraeli is responding to the Industrial Revolution, and as we'll talk about in future units, one of the big political responses to the Industrial Revolution was the socialist uprising and the writings of Karl Marx, who obviously believed in communism and things like that. Now, what the Industrial Revolution did was it really created these social classes of kind of like factory owner and factory workers, this kind of big divide, which was different to in the past, where you'd kind of had the gentry and the lower classes, you know, like lord and peasant, if you want to kind of oversimplify it. But we've now seen more like what Marx called the bourgeoisie and the... Oh, my mind's gone blank. Bourgeoisie and the other key word. I should have written that down before I got started. But you know, the idea of exploiter and exploitee, one person making money at the expense of another. And this led to a big kind of socialist uprising of this is unfair, and we need to... take down the upper classes, take control of the means of production. What Disraeli says is, whoa, this socialist revolution will be terrible, this will be appalling, it will destroy everything we've kind of got. So us as conservatives, we need to respond to the Industrial Revolution as well. We cannot just carry on banging the same drum. We need to modify our drum and get a new stick. And so he moves ever so slightly towards socialism, and you'll see this again and again with conservatism, is that they do these little steps towards the rival ideologies, enough to kind of say, okay, you can still vote for us, you can still kind of believe in us, but not so much as to destroy what kind of comes before and the things that they value. So what he comes up with is this idea of a paternal society, which of course conservatives would all agree with at this time, traditional conservatism, with the social class still intact, this hierarchy, these ruling classes, but bolting on a far stronger idea that the working class needs to receive much more support. He takes the idea of kind of noblesse oblige, which had been seen in thinkers such as Burke, and basically says we need to push this a lot more. We need to really to show that we have a kind of a moral responsibility and a duty of the establishment to support the working classes and to enabling them. And so, enabling is probably a confusing word when talking about liberalism, but he talks and believes in this idea that there is a social obligation of the upper classes to the lower classes over just this idea of individualism, and that you do you and I'll do me. And this is new. And he calls this one nation because the idea is, what he's saying here is, do not become a nation which is divided into the upper classes and the lower classes, or the factory owners and the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. There we go. Do not become two nations divided into these two ideas, but we are one nation, an organic society with many different levels of society and many different jobs and all that kind of stuff, but we are one, and we are dependent on each other, and we are responsible to each other through our social obligations. And so conservatism, under his ideas, becomes perhaps arguably more compassionate, more open to create policies that will benefit the poor. And we'll talk on the future slides about some practical examples of that. I'm kind of giving you here on this slide the theory, and then I've got some future slides to kind of show you. So this is what he did. So just in case you're kind of sitting there going, yeah, but what does he do? It's coming. And his influence, Disraeli's influence, is heavily seen in many of the future conservative leaders up until this day. And I've got a quote from Boris Johnson coming up on one of the future slides as well. But people like David Cameron have described themselves as One Nation, and Theresa May made reference to it. The 1960s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s is full of One Nation conservative thinkers. It definitely has its breaks, like kind of like the early 1900s. It seems to kind of go out of fashion. The New Right period, of course, it goes out of fashion. But this One Nation idea is gets embedded, and it has a huge influence from that point. But we need to kind of think about the impact here. Now, support for the working classes means, in practical terms, a state that intervenes far more in people's lives and in the economy, with everything that goes with that. Now, depending on your personal ideology, you will look at that kind of red bubble and think, brilliant. Or you'll look at that red bubble and start to go, ooh. Because this is where One Nation Conservative starts to get, you can kind of see where the divisiveness comes. You can see the impact, both positive on people's lives, but also how it starts to kind of move away from some of the traditional conservative principles, and also how it leads in the future to the split with the New Right, who very much disagree with, ideologically, perhaps, with that red bubble. So I just want to summarize a bit here some of the differences and similarities between traditional conservatism and One Nation conservatism, because cards on the table, they are pretty similar. Like, look at the core values of them, and they are essentially the same, but one has taken that step towards these social obligations. So they are similar, and if we kind of look at them in their historical context, we can kind of see how one evolves from the other, just like a slightly taller say Velociraptor, but that sounds like I'm calling the Conservatives Velociraptors, and I'm not meaning to do that. But the traditional conservatism was a response to the French Revolution, and you saw that from the and the English Revolution, of course. You saw that Hobbes was writing his response to the English Civil War. We see that Burke is responding to the French Revolution, and they're all about kind of like, no. We need to protect the ideas that we have and keep a strong state to keep a kind of authority over the country. But we do need to avoid revolution by changing to conserve, says Burke. We can see this in policies such as the Catholic emancipation. If you don't know what that is, Google it, but it's essentially where Catholics are allowed to kind of back to play a full role in society to kind of prevent tensions there. We get the abolition of slavery. Controversially, you can argue that abolition of slavery happened for lots of different reasons other than changing to conserve, but we can still discuss it as this idea that it's a conservative policy that is causing a big change, which you might not see as traditionally conservative. The creation of the police is very conservative because it's about imposing a strong state, an authoritative state, and I'm in the way. And we get representation for towns as well, meaning that they kind of extend democracy or versions of democracy out to the regions and the new towns, which start to kind of appear under the Industrial Revolution as well. There was a period, I think it's Manchester, maybe don't quote me just in case, but there is a period where Manchester is a huge city, but for traditional reasons it's never had any parliamentary representation, and so the Conservatives are eventually going to go, well, we need to fix this. This is not sustainable. So where does One Nation Conservative come in? Well, One Nation Conservatism comes in as a response to the Industrial Revolution, to socialism and class conflict. Now, my personal understanding of ideologies and thinkers has been enhanced so much more by trying to place that thinker in the historical period and the events that take place around them. Like, if you're reading a textbook and you're just trying to go, well, Betty Friedan thinks that, and Oakeshott thinks that, and Disraeli thinks that, you can do that. But if you can think of them as people that live at certain times in certain places, surrounded by certain events, all of a sudden these guys really come alive, and and it's so much easier to kind of remember what they think. It's like, okay, so that's what's happened to them, that's what they don't like about it, and therefore these are their solutions. So I think this is a really important part of learning about political thinkers, is finding not just their ideas but who they are. It helps. So One Nation Conservatism under Disraeli is responding to socialism and class conflict. He argues we need to embrace our class differences, but we are all one nation. He is the one that actually coins that term in one of his speeches. Of course, Benjamin Disraeli. Now, let me just throw out something slightly unusual here, or irritating perhaps. Benjamin Disraeli is not one of the 5 conservative thinkers that is listed on the Edexcel specification. Just have a minute of frustration about that. But you've got to use them. If you're talking about One Nation Conservatism, you've got to use them. But your teacher should have told you that in a political ideas essay, you have to have at least 2, and ideally 3 or 4 key thinkers. He doesn't count towards that 2. Bring him in. Include him in your essays. Just make sure you include at least 2 more from the key list. So I'm going to call him like a key thinker plus. Bonus key thinker. Anyway, right. So he says, and this is one of his quotes, we need to elevate the condition of all people. Improve the lives of all. This was new. This was a change. And he also says, if I can move myself to one side. Nope, I cannot move myself to one side. There we are. He says, the palace is not safe when the cottage is not happy. And I think that's a beautiful quote because it has that wonderful kind of visual kind of metaphor kind of going on. That the castle, the palace, the rich, the wealthy, the upper classes, the ruling classes in their wonderful palace, it will not be safe unless the cottages, the working classes, the working class people are not happy. I.e., if we do not placate, if we do not help, if we do not support the working classes, we risk revolution like what was eventually seen in Russia, what had been seen in France. It is a warning against revolution that has been seen both before and after the time of Disraeli in history. So if you support what the British country kind of is and the British kind of institutions are, he was probably right that if conservatism had not evolved this way, the history of Britain could have been different because it could have led to some form of revolution, perhaps. So what does One Nation Conservatism actually mean in practical steps? Well, first of all, it means that he brought in acts. Disraeli personally brought in acts such as the Factory Act, which helped the conditions of children in the factories, the amount of hours people could work. The Artisan Dwellings Act, which put rules in place on how new houses had to be and their sanitary conditions, and the Second Reform Act. He's a One Nation conservative, meaning one nation, meaning the UK. Now, we will in the future, I hope if we get time, look a little bit at how conservatism has this pro-European, anti-European split. But Disraeli's definitely on the side of One Nation UK, and so he brings in tariffs and import controls to benefit one nation, this nation, and to kind of build up the British kind of economy, or make Britain great again, if you want to get on your MABA hats. MABA hat? Can we make that a thing? And I'm moving on from kind of Disraeli here. Now, this kind of leads in the future to what we would recognise as Keynesian economics, or Keynesian economics. The idea that the state should intervene in the economy to keep it solvent, to support big businesses which might be in danger of failing, to keep certain factories going where jobs might be lost, but a state that is willing to intervene in the economy. In the future, in the 1960s and 70s, this means, of course, that Conservatives are also going to support a welfare state. Now, although Labour started the NHS and the Liberals started national insurance, Conservatives never removed those things. They got back into office. They could have abolished the NHS in 1951, I think it was. They could have done, but they didn't. They could have abolished it again in the 1960s. They didn't. Thatcher even could have abolished it in the 1980s, but she didn't. And so One Nation conservatism very much accepted the need for a welfare state and a mixed economy, as in a mixture of private, public economy, i.e. Private railroads. Publicly owned railroads, government-owned railroads, government-owned energy companies. And it's not till you get to the New Right that you get a kind of a withdrawal from this. This time of history is often known as the post-war consensus, which is something you may be taught about. State housing, council housing, whichever phrase you might use to kind of support that. These can all be seen in the policies of people like Macmillan, again in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, conservatism, and even in Apparently, I've just been promoted to Prime Minister, but sadly not. That is David Cameron. This can even be seen, I'll just put myself down here like some sort of small egg. You can even be seen in up-to-date policies such as David Cameron's Big Society, which he talked about in 2015, I think it was. Which is the idea that we're all one society, we should all kind of support one another. And in Theresa May's Just About Managings, the jams, she said in her first speech, before it all went horribly wrong, she said, if you are the Just About Managing, I am here for you, we are here for you, and we will support you. Sadly, she was never able to do anything about that because she got stuck with Brexit, but that was her idea, that was her ideology, so she said. And of course, Boris, here he is, floating out the top of my head, said in 2010 when he was London Mayor, I am a One Nation Tory, directly referring back to Benjamin Disraeli from the 1800s. I am a One Nation Tory. There is a duty, social obligation, on the part of the rich to the poor and to the needy. But you are not going to help people express that duty and satisfy it if you punish them fiscally, so viciously that they leave this city and this country. I want London to be a competitive, dynamic place to come to work. So it's interesting. So what you're seeing there is Boris actually fusing one nation ideas. There is a duty on the part of the rich and the poor to the needy. But with some of the ideas that we start to see with the new right later that talks about a free economy, and he starts talking about fiscal ideas, which of course leads us beautifully to the ideas of the new right, which we'll be looking at in a couple of. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, then don't forget to like it. Please subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment telling me all the things I got wrong. In the next video, we're going to be looking at a gentleman called Michael Oakeshott, who is possibly the most fashionable pipe smoker of all time. He's a little bit of a standalone thinker in conservatism, and I'll talk about that when we get there. And then after Oakeshott comes Thatcherism, New Right, neoliberalism, neoconservatism, and some big, big changes to what it means to be conservative. I hope you're looking forward to finding out about it, because I'm looking forward to telling you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.